Welcome to Rough Characters Podcast. I'm your host, Philip Overby.
And I'm John Palladino.
And we're back with another episode, and today we're going to be talking about something that could be slightly controversial. It depends on your stance on it. Don't worry, it won't be too controversial, I guess. But we'll be talking about prologues / epilogues in fantasy novels. So we both have kind of extreme differences about this. So it'll be interesting to hear what we divulge today. But before we do that, let's talk about what's going on in the world. Anything pique your interest recently?
Yes. So this isn't exactly new for us at the moment, but I do want to get your thoughts on it. I guess in the context of this podcast, it's kind of funny to think about. But if you remember Game of Thrones,
No, I don't remember that.
kind of a prologue to the announced Jon Snow sequel show, which was announced a while ago, but we haven't really talked about it. And I thought I'd bring it up because I wanted to see how you felt about that.
So it's
So have you not heard of this?
So I've heard of the Jon Snow show. Jon Snow show. Easy for you to say. But I haven't heard of the any other thing related to Game of Thrones other than the House of Dragon and like a possible other thing. But
yeah, so they announced that they're working with the Kit Harington, the actor that played Jon Snow, to make a Jon Snow sequel show to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I know that.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, how do I feel about that? Well, I think it'll probably get more kind of, not backlash, but probably more scrutiny because it's a sequel. And, however people think about the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones, they weren't received well by the majority of people. I would assume. I personally didn't hate them, but compared to some other people, but
you didn't hate the last season of Game of Thrones, Phil?
I mean, I just
that could be a debate podcast right there.
I mean, I don't know how I felt about it. I guess because there was no source material for the last.
Fair, but that's the problem, I think, was that they didn't have any source material. But the way that they actually ended it was like, I mean, I don't want to be super rude, but like I feel like 10-year-old me could have come up with a better ending.
Well, it's just yeah, that could be a whole nother episode dedicated to just that probably. But as far as like doing a Jon Snow, what's Jon Snow doing after? I would say that's probably the best character to do that with, because if you're gonna do it, he's going like above the wall, right? I mean, that's where he left off at the end of Game of Thrones.
I would agree that if there was one character to focus on, that would be the one that probably has the most interest. Maybe. So here's my qualms with it, and this is going to, obviously we're talking about a sequel. I'm going to try and talk about it without spoiling a ton, but just merely talking about Jon Snow is a spoiler already because, he's alive. But, so at the end of Game of Thrones, all this crap happens that no one liked, particularly who ended up on the Iron Throne is like what really irked me. But, and yeah, Jon Snow's resolution was like, okay, I'm going back to the wall basically because if I stay here, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So he kind of exiles himself to the wall, I guess. But here's my problem. Everything beyond the wall, I mean, the Night King and all that, what is the point? Like, what are we doing? You know, what have the wildlings? Where are they? Like, are there many? I don't know. And they're friends. So, like, what's going to be the purpose of the show? You know, like,
Well, I think one direction they could go is the fact that Beyond the Wall was always seen as this kind of mysterious, like what's really there, and it's so expansive. So I think if you're going in that direction, they could, reveal new things that were never known about before, or they could go in they they wouldn't have to go in the Wildlings, Night King, Undead direction. They could go with giants. Maybe there's a giant tribe that is doing something, or maybe there's some magic. I mean, a lot of the like kind of magical stuff in the series seem to come from Beyond the Wall anyway. Like uh, the Night King was, probably the most fantastical thing in the show, I guess, other than dragons.
yeah,
So, I mean, they could go in whatever direction they wanted to, and it would be, I guess, it would be more of like almost like a survival show than a typical
I
like court show
I
or whatever.
think if you took the idea of like you've played like like the Elder Scrolls games or like Fallout, right?
Yeah,
And like there's this moment in those games, like when you get done with the prologue and you like walk out of the starting area and you're like in this whole new world, and it's kind of like mind blowing because you can go anywhere and explore anything. And if they, I could really dig a show that's like, he walks through the wall, and then it's just like, okay, now what? And it's like all about exploration and discovering different things, and I think that could be really cool. My fears are though that we're going to not kind of focus on that stuff, and if they do like only Jon Snow in the show, I think that could be really cool and interesting. But if they do like basically Jon Snow and then it expands into basically Game of Thrones, the sequel,
yeah,
and they kind of go back to Westeros, and we're back with the Starks and the Lannisters and like everything again. I just don't know how interested I'm going to be in because of how like stupid the ending of the show for me it was. Like I love House of the Dragon so far,
yeah.
and
I think uh, I think if they do just John going out into the wilderness and kind of finding new things or whatever, they don't have to retcon anything and be like, oh, that didn't happen or that didn't happen
yeah,
or
just
like,
ignore all of what happened. Focused on Jon Snow, like venturing out. Maybe every once in a while, he has a conversation with um, Ed, someone I don't know. I'm wondering if that God, what was his name? The redheaded wildling, Tormund, I think his name was. I wonder if he's gonna come back. I
oh,
think his name was Tormund
yeah,
Giantsbane.
he was an interesting. I think he was a kind of a fan favorite, so he might be an interesting like sidekick kind of character or something.
Yeah, I think he could come back, but for the most part, I really don't want like. And this is episode 4, and we're going to have a cameo from this character. And now in episode 5, these people are going to visit the wall. And now in episode 6, Arya's going to come back from her trip, and like, you know what I
Well,
mean? Like, I just don't want all of that.
yeah, I think House of the Dragon has done well in setting itself 172 years before, because they could literally use the names that people know without having to be the characters, right? So they can use, oh, I know Targaryen, and I saw something online that the Leo DiCaprio meme where he's like pointing at the TV. It's like, I know that name, I know that name. But it's like none of the characters, they're all like grandpa or whatever of this character, you know.
Right.
I mean, Viserys the first, Viserys the second, I guess, is the shithead that gets the gold dumped on his head in Game of Thrones. Uh, Same name, different guy.
Right, yeah. It's true.
So, yeah, there's a lot of good in doing that kind of prequel because you can delve into that whole aspect of the history and like what was going on, but without all of the like issues of like how we're going to connect this to the original Game of Thrones because you don't really need to. So
Yeah, I'm hoping they just distance themselves from like where the world ended on Game of Thrones, because just man, that left such a sour taste in so many people's mouths. You know, like I think it's ballsy of them to do this show. I really do.
well,
But,
from what I gather, and people may like this or not like it, I like it myself. Like the idea of like a Westeros cinematic universe or whatever the hell you want to call it, where it's like,
hey, I'm all for more content in that world.
yeah,
I think that Westeros is my favorite fantasy world. I think ever really. I don't know if it's the world itself or like the books are so spectacular,
yeah,
and then the show phenomenal until the end, and House of the Dragon just amazing so far.
yeah. I was kind of at the beginning. I was kind of like, I don't know, because first episode you're always kind of like, we'll see what happens. But
Right.
at this point, I think it's mostly getting praise from people. I haven't seen anybody really shitting on it or anything.
I'm sure if you search, there's some people,
Yeah, I see
but
most
not.
of the people that are shitting on it are people that haven't actually watched it. They're just shitting on the idea of like doing any kind of Game of Thrones stuff, which to me doesn't make any
That's fair.
sense because it's
Those people did the same thing for Game of Thrones, though.
yeah, it's kind of like we had talked about Star Wars before. It's kind of like, oh, I don't like the way they did the last trilogy, so I don't want to watch any Star Wars stuff anymore. I mean, I guess people do that, but
I'm the biggest advocate for the sequel trilogy being like the worst thing in the. I hate the sequel trilogy more than the ending of Game of Thrones, but I still have enjoyed other Star Wars content though. I think
yeah,
that to be that like yeah, I'm not excited for Jon Snow, and I have a lot of worry about it. I think that to say, oh, Game of Thrones ended terribly, so I'm not going to watch any more of it. It's just foolish because I liked the show so much before they ruined it. I love the books, and why would I not at least give it a try? You know, it's different showrunners too, and
yeah.
I would be amazed if they ever had the original showrunners for Game of Thrones return. That would be like, what are you doing?
Well, that would be like the Jamie Lannister redemption arc, maybe for them.
Yeah, and then so what you're telling me is they're going to absolutely botch it. Because
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but the Jamie Lannister redemption arc ended really dumbly.
Of all the things that ended that show, I hated that the most. I have to say the Jamie Lannister redemption arc. That
It was so bad.
that did disappoint me greatly. Other stuff I can kind of like go, I can kind of see that, but yeah, that was like, oh boy.
I honestly think the end for every single Lannister in that season was painfully just awful. I
Yeah,
mean,
and I think a
like,
lot of people were not happy with Cersei Lannister just getting a rock dropped on her head. And it's like, okay,
yeah, that's
that's
stupid.
it.
Jamie's end was stupid, and Tyrion became stupid. But he'd been stupid for the last like 2 seasons anyway, and never made sense. They just ruined that character. But um, you know, such is life, I guess.
Well, this is a good transition point to talk about our topic, prologues and epilogues, because in my opinion, maybe this is controversial, I don't know, but prologues, for me anyway, I tend to kind of gloss over them because I want to get to what's like the meat of the story as soon as possible. But the only I've talked to you about this off podcast. I don't know how you would off air. I don't know what you would say, but that the Game of Thrones, the book A Game of Thrones prologue is one of my favorites, just because it introduces kind of the mystery of the world in an interesting way, and then kind of jumps into the how this deals with like the Stark family and all that kind of stuff. But other than that, I rack my brain thinking of any prologue that like really blew me away or made me want to read more of the story. It's usually I just want to get to chapter one and like get to what's happening, and I can figure out the world as I go kind of thing, rather than having it kind of like because I find a lot of prologues can be info dumpy if like they're not done well. I don't know. But
Yeah, so
you are pro prologue, so
I enjoy prologues and epilogues with a caveat. Um, they have to be relevant. They have to matter. There has to be a reason for there to be a prologue. There has to be it has to be an interesting prologue. There has to be if you're telling me that in the prologue, if you are outlining the 100-year history of your world so that people understand what's going on before you start the world, I'm not into that. I'm in several Facebook writing groups where there's a lot of writers that are always asking about prologues, and it's interesting because there's a big split. There's a lot of people that I've seen anyway that absolutely hate prologues. There's a staggering amount of people who skip them, and that baffles me because as long as the prologue is the way that I think it should be done, which is maybe a taste of action or some inciting, interesting event, a lot of times that can be crucially important information. Uh, but if it's like you said, a big info dump, don't don't write that. I always say to beginning authors that are in these writing groups who ask, can I do the prologue or should I do a prologue? I always say no one gives a shit about your world until they do. And what I mean by that is if you're going to give us information that's just history lessons, no one cares, right? At the
yeah,
beginning, they just want good characters, good story. And if you're giving us information that we have no context for, we're not going to be able, well, I'm not saying we all can, but a lot of people are not going to be able to process that and understand any of it because usually I'm talking fantasy here particularly, um, but I mean you have so many made up names and terms and stuff that until we actually know what those mean, no one cares. And until I'm invested in your world and I want to know more about the world, I don't care about the world.
yeah. I mean, I don't hate prologues and I don't skip them. I'll read them. I'm just trying to. I rack my brain trying to think of a prologue that I was like, man, that really hyped me up for the rest of the story. I just can't think of
Okay,
many.
so I can't think of like specific examples because I didn't do any homework to provide them. But I
Yeah,
will say that I know that I've read two different types of prologues. The one I think we both agree is sucks. But the other one, which I've read a decent amount of them, I just again can't come up with any specific examples, but they give you like some cool thing. Maybe they introduce the magic system, or maybe they introduce an inciting event that like kind of kicks off the book. I like it. I like to read a chapter where some crazy shit happens. I'm like, whoa, that was awesome. Now I want to get back to like that kind of content. I think that a good prologue can also serve as like a an appetizer, if you will, for like what's to come. So like if you're writing a brutal story and you have like the brutal prologue, it's like, oh, I can't wait to get into like some more of this.
I mean, just start with chapter one then, and that's my point. Like, I want to get right. I guess it's a difference between uh, fantasy and other genres I've read. I like thrillers also. Some of my favorite books are actually thrillers. Like Gone Girl is one of my favorite all-time books. Um, and I don't remember it having a prologue, but I remember it getting like right into stuff where I was immediately engaged with the story, and I find like when you're thrust into the now of the story, it gives them more urgency to it and more like, okay, there's more tension or something. I feel like a prologue, there's not as much tension because it's not timeline wise, it's kind of like already happened, right?
I think it
Whereas,
depends on the prologue, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
so I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm anti prologue. I'm just trying to think like what is the point of them, and why are they so prevalent in fantasy when they're not as prevalent, I think, in maybe some other genres, or at least I just don't. Maybe they are prevalent in other genres. I just don't notice it as much because, like you said, a lot of the prologues that I kind of like am not as interested in are very like in the
Okay,
land
so
of Elendrel in the year 600, the elves bound together with the dwarven fuckers or whatever. I
right,
don't know.
so I did not come into this podcast with the idea that I was going to talk about my own book, but I do want to kind of give you like why I made a prologue.
Yeah.
Um, because I get what you're saying, but why not start the book like at chapter one? And I'm a I'm a pantser when I write, so like I don't plot anything. I just sit down and start writing. So I'm going to try and reason this without sounding random, but I I sat down, I just started writing. But and at the time that I started writing the prologue, it was actually chapter one, right? Like I didn't plan on having a prologue, but when I got to the end of the chapter, I was like, oh, okay, clearly the way this is written and where I'm going next, this is actually the prologue. And I thought about just scrapping it entirely, but in the prologue, I introduced the magic system, which I thought would be a good kind of taste. But mostly, it was to show one of the main characters. There's 5 points of view characters, but it was to show one of them in a very, very like specific way. So that when you get to that character, uh, then you see them from their own point of view, and like, but in the back of your head, you're like, but wait a minute, you're like, other people see you way differently, and basically showing him bad in the prologue. In his chapters, he's still not great, but like you know some of his past, and then later in the book, it goes, it doesn't go back to the prologue, but it references the prologue, and some like big kind of revelations happen. But if I wanted to start from chapter one, then it would either have to be a flashback later in the novel, or what? Because it's like 5 years before the start of the book. So my question to you would be, um, you don't like basically prologues in general, but what would you prefer? Like, would you like that prologue, or would you rather have it be a flashback? I can't stand flashbacks. I wrote a whole long flashback in my book, but for the most part, I really hate them.
Yeah. I would say I would prefer a prologue to flashback, because just flashback in a novel, I don't know, kind of takes me out of it. I guess. I guess if it's
I
done,
agree.
I guess if it's done well, it can work. But um, I don't have any particular preference. Like if a book has a prologue, I'm not like, oh fuck a prologue. I'm just like, I just don't understand why uh, they're always needed. I mean, I guess ideally, in your case, you wanted to introduce, some crucial things that happen later in the story, and usually that's what people use prologues for. Like, if they're like, good writers, they're gonna try to, like you said, the prologue's like an appetizer. Like, here's a taste of what's to come later, and it's kind of like a teaser almost. So if people do it that way, it can be good. It's just I find that most prologues in fantasy books I've read
Like 1,000-year histories.
don't do that. Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's just that I find a lot of prologues are very vague, like, and they're name dropping a lot of stuff, and I'm just like, I don't know what any of this is, and I'm kind of like confused. And then I get to chapter one, I'm like, okay, now I sort of know what's going on. I think that's kind of the issue, is like I get pushed into the prologue and it's like, here's a bunch of shit that'll make sense later.
Yeah,
And I'm just like, I don't know what the purpose of this is right now.
yeah. The thing that really pisses me off about that kind of prologue is they'll like drop a whole bunch of information that like you don't know, and then you get into chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and none of those things that they talked about comes up until chapter 23, and you're like, well, what?
Yeah, I guess it's like I understand why people do it, because I think in their mind they're thinking, I'm playing the long game with this. Like, I want people to build expectation for what happened in my prologue, but it doesn't always work that way. Like for me, it generally doesn't work that way. I don't feel like after reading the prologue, I'm like, I can't wait to see what happens next. The exception, was a Game of Thrones, where at the beginning there's this undead presence, and then it's basically not brought up. It's basically
Yeah.
like, that's not real, but it's real. So there's that threat, that looming major threat. So I think if it's something like that, like none of the characters know about it, but you know about it, I guess that's uh, it's a type of irony in writing, where the reader knows about something but the characters don't know. It builds that anticipation. So for me, the Game of Thrones reveal of like, oh, there's undead that like, and then the guy tells them, undead killed this guy, and they're like, nah, no, they didn't. Fuck you. Chop your head off. And that was the only witness to it. So
Right.
you have that, like, okay, we know it exists, but the characters don't. So when is this gonna show up? So if you do something like that, or if, like you said in your prologue, you're introducing a character that has a major impact on the story later, then it can work. It's just I would have to go through all of my books and just look at the prologues and see, like, there's only a handful of them that I could probably point to, that I'll be, oh yeah, that was a cool prologue. But like a lot of my favorite books, I don't remember if they have a prologue or not. I just remember the Game of Thrones one specifically. And I'm sure there's great books that I love that have prologues. I just can't pinpoint
Right.
them.
I also can't specifically think of like, oh man, that book had a great prologue or that one had an awful one. But I think that uh, so many authors uh, really find. I think they take too much influence from Tolkien uh, because he's famous for creating like so much history and lore, and I think a lot of people might fall into that trap of trying to do the same thing. Maybe, I mean, it worked for Tolkien, it works for plenty of other authors, and a lot of people like that stuff. But for me, I'm like you. It's like, come on, to get to the story, but like again, I favor prologues a little bit more than you, I think, because as long as they're not the history of your world.
I can't think of another one that stood out to me. Do you know what the name of the first book in the Stormlight archive is? Brandon Sanderson's series.
The Way of Kings.
Way of Kings. Yeah, I like that prologue. I remember that one because it had like that assassin character. It was like a really badass, like weird magic assassin dude.
What's his name? Like Seth or Zeth or something? I can't pronounce it. It's like
Yeah,
SSZ or something. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. However, I would actually cite that as a prologue I don't like for the following reason. He introduces, like, the scene itself is great, if I'm remembering it correctly. It's been a long time since I've read that book, but I've read the whole series so far of the Stormlight Archive.
yeah.
My biggest problem is they introduced this character that I want to know more about, and jeez, for the first, what, 2 books, he has like one chapter maybe in each.
Well,
Like, it's
I haven't
crazy.
read. I've only read the first one, so I don't know what happens
Oh, okay. Well,
with the
I
character.
apologize for spoiling anything,
No, it's fun,
but
but
he's just such a nothing burger character for so long. Really, I think for most of the series. Again, it's been so long since I've read it. I can't tell you how prevalent he becomes or doesn't become. But I just remember the whole time thinking, like, why do we keep bringing this up if like we're not going to explore it more? I want to explore it more, but like,
yeah,
let's go.
that's another issue that I mean we can talk about. I think this would be a good topic for another episode. Is multiple point of views in a book, which you've experienced writing yourself, and I've experienced reading it. Uh, I haven't. I've attempted to write novels with multiple point of views that all failed. Um,
It's
but
crazy how
this is
much
something.
it becomes.
Yeah, this is something could get into in another thing. But it's the idea of like you have a character that looks really cool, and then you're waiting for that character to show back up. And I know like in Game of Thrones, I was always looking forward to like Tyrion's chapters or whatever.
Right. So
Uh,
real quick on the multi POV thing, I think you're right. I think we should talk about it in a podcast. But I just wanted to quickly say that I think it's a double-edged sword with multi POVs because inevitably you're always going to have characters you love way more than others, or storylines that are way more interesting than others, and you want to keep getting back to those. But as a reader, I think that multi POV books pull me through them like faster than a single POV book, and I think it's because I'm like, oh, I really want to get back to Tyrion's chapter. I really want to get back to Jaime. Oh no, I have to read Bran again. I'm gonna read that chapter real quick so I can get back to someone good.
but
Oh shit, Sansa's next.
that's weird reasoning though. It's like
I think it's that anticipation slash like, oh man, I really like. You have that like, ah, fuck. Now we're on this person. Well, I'm done for today. But then the next day you read that chapter, you know, begrudgingly so. But then you get through it and you're like, yes, I'm back, baby. And then you read that chapter, and then that one ends on a cliffhanger, and you're like, fuck, now I need to get back to him. And like, I think that for me at least, multi POV can easily make me just pull me through the story, you know?
well, we should save this for another time. But what about epilogues? So this was kind of a late addition to talk about, and I can't really pinpoint any like epilogues I loved either. But
Okay, so epilogues. I love epilogues. I think that it is stupendously rare where I don't love an epilogue, and here's why. In And I can't give any specific examples when it comes to books because I don't remember what's an epilogue and what's not most of the time.
Yeah.
But if you're reading a series, let's say Game of Thrones, and the Game of Thrones might not even have epilogues, I don't remember. But like in any big series like that, you read this massive book. It's so great. But then an epilogue obviously it depends on the series or the book on how effective this is. But often I find it very effective where the story ends and then you get like one last chapter that just is a tease for the next like tome that you're waiting for to read. And some crazy thing happens and you're like, oh my god, now I need to get the next book. And I think that's why I like them so much, is they kind of tease the next thing, or like you finish a series and then they have an epilogue and you're like, oh my god, there's gonna be another series. Or and actually I think you said that you didn't have much thoughts on epilogues earlier when we were talking off the podcast, but I this came to mind and I wanted to ask you about it. I would consider after credit scenes to kind of be an epilogue. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say that my experience with epilogues is more in that realm of the after credits thing, and I've actually grown to hate this because it's become an expectation, and I think people sit through the credits of the movie waiting for something, and it's like if the after credit scene sucks, then people are like, why the fuck did I just sit here for another
Yes, so that was
10
my
minutes?
point. Is and I'm not a Marvel fan, so I can't really tell you my experience with this. My brother is. He watches almost everything that comes out from Marvel, and he's well aware of the after credit thing, and he watches all that shit. And 80% of the time, he tells me, "Wow, what a shit scene! It didn't actually do anything except tease the next movie, but not even in an interesting way." Um, Now I know that you haven't seen all of the Star Wars shows. What one
Yeah,
you have seen? The Mandalorian season 1 and 2, right?
yeah.
Did you happen to catch the after credit scene for season 2?
No, because I probably just stopped. Like once they do that long ass credit at the end of every episode, I'm just like, all right, that.
Fair, but yeah, at the end of the season there was a extra credit scene which actually revealed a new show.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, it was. I don't know if you want me to spoil it or not, but
I don't I don't care. You can tell me.
okay. So at the end of the Mandalorian season 2, the credits roll, and then it shows Boba Fett and Fennec Shand, and they go to Jabba's palace, and they walk down the stairs to where Jabba used to be, and it's now taken over by God, I can't remember his name, but his sidekick, the Twi'lek with like the long
Oh,
nails. And
what's his name? Bib Fortuna.
yes. He's sitting on the throne. He's gotten fat, and basically they're like, okay, we're here to take over, and they shoot and kill him. And then they take his body and throw him off the throne, and they sit in the throne, and then the title screen pops up, and it says the Book of Boba Fett coming at whatever the date was for the show. Now I gotta say, amazing epilogue, like just I was so like, oh my god, like blown away. Such a cool scene. Wasn't expecting it. I accidentally watched it because when I watch The Mandalorian, it's usually on Disney Plus on my phone, and when the credits, like when they end, I always fast forward the bar at the bottom of the screen so that I can finish the episode all the way. So that because sometimes the app glitches and it saves it so that like oh, you still need to continue watching this episode. But so I
Yeah.
always fast forward, and when I did that, I caught I caught that there was like a scene. I was like, oh my god! So I watched it, and it blew me away. And then, of course, the show, The Book of Boba Fett, which I'm not going to spoil because I don't think you've seen that,
No.
was very underwhelming for a lot of it. But definitely, by the way, you have to watch that if you want to watch Mandalorian season 3. But it's
Well, I got too much stuff to do.
I get that, but so yeah, I think that after credit scenes when they're done correctly can be amazing. But like you said, there's so many out there that like, oh my god, they're so stupid.
Well,
Actually, what was
you
that?
know, when you leave a movie, right, you want to have like a positive feeling. You want to be like, oh, let's,
Yeah,
when you're talking with your friend or whatever when you leave the movie, and then, but if there's a stupid after credit scene, it kind of puts a bad. You're like, you're talking about that instead. Man, that was a dumb. What the hell was that shit?
yeah, and Marvel does that all the time. But I think it's because now the audience has come to expect it, and if they don't have one, then they're going to be outraged. Like every
Yeah.
other Marvel film has had one. Why is there not one now? And while it's nice that they've bred this kind of expectation in their fans, make them interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the Batman.
Is that the one with Robert
Yeah.
Pattinson?
Yeah,
I
it's
haven't.
act it's actually one of my favorite Batman movies, I have to say. And the reason is just because it totally subverted my expectations of what a Batman movie could be. And the end credits were they did like an end credit scene, which spoiler, which teases. Do you care if I tell you spoiler?
No, I don't watch Batman.
Okay, so uh, basically the Riddler meets the Joker in the insane asylum, so it teases the
Oh,
Joker for the
nice.
next movie. And they actually cut a scene that was going to be in the movie with Batman talking to the Joker, and the scene was actually really good, but it didn't really fit into the movie. But it fit. It introduces like who could be the next villain in the next series or whatever, and that was a good post credit because it's kind of like setting up the next confrontation for the next movie. But if it's just like, hey, here's this character that we may do another movie with, it's kind of like, all right.
Yeah,
I
and
don't care about that character, but like setting up the Joker as the next possible villain, that's pretty big. So
right. It's like I don't know the end credit scene, especially when you're talking about like Disney. I think it's like they have so many misses. It's like I don't know. It's I think that if you have a good one, it can be really impactful. If you have a bad one, like just if you don't have an idea, don't put one in there. And there's epilogues in books that are the same way. You'll read a whole epilogue about like nothing. Why is this here? Admittedly, I think it's very rare when I've had a feeling of like reading an epilogue and thinking like this was pointless. But famously, the Redwall books they have epilogues in I think every book, and it's always, as far as I'm aware, uh, the recorder of Redwall many years later writing down kind of what happened to all the survivors of the book, and I think that's like kind of, I always thought that was really cool. Uh, you get a brief overview of what happened at Redwall Abbey and all the little creatures, but uh, and it's short. It's not like super long.
Yeah. I think I have less feelings about epilogues than I do prologues. I think the prologue thing kind of, the idea of talking about this on the show kind of came from me saying, like, yeah, I don't see the point in prologues. And you were like, what? So that's why we talked about it.
I think that I half agree with you though. Like, I think if it's going to be a meandering history of the world or the politics of what's happening before you know anyone, it's just almost pointless because it's like none of that information is going to stick. You know?
Yeah. So to wrap up, writers, if you're planning to do a prologue, have the expectation that some people don't care about them. At least uh, you should know that there are certain readers that just want to get to the story. And if you're going to do a prologue, try not to do a long history thing because usually people aren't going to care. Not always. Some people are really into that stuff. But I find that typically, if you're going to do a prologue, it needs to be something that's going to, like, impact the story in a major way, uh, so that the reader has some kind of, like, expectation and there's some tension that comes from the prologue.
Yeah, I think that for a prologue, you if you're going to outline the history or whatever, and it's like a long, dry, boring prologue, you are not setting up your reader expectation. I mean, maybe the whole story is like that, but like if you have like this action-packed story, you really shouldn't start it out with the long, boring like history lesson.
Yeah, so this is a good time to transition to something that's not a long, boring history lesson. It's time for my chance to fight in the rough characters arena. So today, John will be the DM, and I will be uh, trying to survive with a first level wizard. BB over,
All
and
right.
we'll see how this works. So, John, you can introduce what I'm going to be getting killed by today.
Yes. So you are fighting a challenge rating 5 monster. Uh, so I think that your chances are not great. It is
Hmm.
called a Cambion. I think I said that right. A lot of the monsters in D&D have names I've never actually heard pronounced. So, we do what we can. And if you don't know what a Cambion is, it is a fiend. Basically, it's the offspring of a humanoid, typically a human, and another fiend, which is usually a succubus or an incubus.
Wow.
Yeah,
And I'm a first level wizard.
you are a first level wizard. So let's see. How, do you think you're going to be able to make it past round 1?
I mean, if he like just, I mean, I don't have any armor, I don't think. So,
You are a wizard, so yeah, this might not go down very well.
so unless he just critical fumbles on his first action, then I don't suppose I'm gonna last very long.
Well, let's toss out our initiatives and see where we're at.
All right. I'm just gonna click it there.
All right. So you got a 8. Wow, completely whiffs the initiative. You got a
Nice.
6.
I'm
That's
gonna
not
get.
the roll I think you wanted him to screw up, though.
Yeah. We're for reference, we're using roll 20. So uh, with roll 20, typically if you roll shit or roll really good, the next roll is gonna statistically probably not be good. So, all right, BB over, unleash your magic. So I'm gonna look at my spells here, and I'm gonna take about 20 minutes to find a good spell, like any good wizard does when they play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
No, just kidding. All right. Just for effect, I'm going to cast something that I've never even heard of, and I guess this is a newer spell. I don't know. Thunder Wave,
Ah, Thunderwave. Yes, I know that spell.
level 1.
Okay.
So Thunder Wave lets me 15-foot cube around myself. A wave of thunderous force sweeps out from you. Each creature must make a Constitution saving throw. Ah, shit. Never mind.
All right, so your spell save DC is 13, and he rolled a 17, so he succeeds. So he takes half damage, and he's not pushed away. But really, the damage you don't even have to worry about. He has far too much health; it's not going to matter. And even if you pushed him away, it wouldn't have mattered anyway because he has a ranged attack, and he
Can I
gets
roll
to
my?
fire at you twice with it. You can roll your
Can
damage if you want,
Yeah, just
just
for
for
the
the
hell of it.
lulz. Sure.
It's
So
D.
2d8 thunder damage, and he takes half damage because he succeeded on a save. Let's just see if you even hurt the dude.
Hey, that's pretty
At
good.
9, which is halved to 5. I can't remember the rounding rules in D&D. I think it's rounded up, rounded down.
5. Ouch.
Can't remember. It's 5 or 4. Either
Eat
way,
shit. Can be on.
does not hurt. So now he's going to attack you with a ray of fire. And
What?
I think that our little wizard is about to burn up. Oh, and might I add, he actually gets to use it twice per turn.
Oh, nice. Well,
Yeah. I think you're hit. He rolled a 21.
yeah.
Alright, let's see if this kills you.
No.
Whoops. That is not...
Yeah, 2 damage. Nice. I'm still
Oh,
alive.
I screwed up my... It's actually 9 damage. I forgot to... I screwed up my rolls on Roll20 here. I'll have to fix that later. It's actually
9
3d6.
damage.
Yeah, 9 damage. Are you still up?
You just got me.
Okay. I was going to say, if you have more health than my paladin, that is absurd. So you went down?
Yeah.
Alright, so you survived 1 round.
Shit.
Good job, wizard. So if you survived 1 round, that means you get to roll on our mundane items treasure generator at challenge rating 5. For anyone that tuned into our first podcast, we had trouble finding the right generator, so that came out kind of wacky, but we got it. We got it now.
All right, what should I roll?
All right, so you want to go to the link. You want to change the challenge rating to 5. Make sure your treasure is selected at the top, and then I selected individual treasure with items, and then I under type. Then I clicked generate. I went to the first of the options, and whatever the first item is that isn't money on there is what I took last time, which was a salted fish.
I got a small hammer and chisel.
Oh, look at you go. Now you can make little models of the creatures that vanquish you.
Yay. A small hammer and chisel. I'll add this later.
All right.
All right, so as this podcast continues, we'll probably be changing the rules here and there, but for now, we're basically just going to be surviving 1 round, it looks like, because, yeah, these enemies are pretty tough for first level people, so we'll
I have a
we'll
proposal.
yeah.
If we go, let's say, and of course the way that we're going to be releasing these podcasts, this might sound out of order, and we might already be doing it, who knows, but if we go, let's say, like, three battles each, so 6 podcasts, and neither of us have ever made it past round 1. I think we should either level up. I think leveling up would be good. I was going to say, or lower the challenge rating of monsters we fight. Who wants to do that? These people are supposed to get fucked, right?
Yeah. The idea of our characters is just to put them through torture for the hell of it.
Right.
All right, well, that concludes another episode. So, anything you want to mention before we close?
Just check out the Trials of Ashmount, my book. That'd be great. And come to Grimdark Fiction Readers and Writers for the Facebook group where we're both at.
And you can also visit negative-hp.com where we'll be putting up the episodes, and I'll have some other content there that you might be interested in. And until next time, that's the end. See ya.
Bye.